To Kill a Mockingbird, Part 2, Chapter 12. Jim was 12. He was getting so moody and hard to live with. After Miss Du Bois had been dead for a couple of weeks, he started changing and telling me what to do. Jim hollered, "It's time you start being a girl and actin' right." I burst into tears and ran to Calpurnia. Calpurnia told me not to fret and that he was growing up. She even started calling him Mr. Jim, like he was a grown-up. I spent a lot of time with Calpurnia waiting for summer when Dill would come to make home. Summer came, and Dill did not come. Dill sent a letter and said that he had a new father and that he would have to stay in Meridian. The state legislature was called to an emergency session, and Atticus left us for 2 weeks. One Sunday we went with Calpurnia to her church. She got us all clean and spent time going over our clothes. My dress had so much starch in it, it came up like a tent when I sat down. "It's like we're going to Mardi Gras," said Jim. "What's all this for, Cal?" "I don't want anybody saying I don't look after my children," she muttered. "Mr. Jim, you absolutely can't wear that tie with that suit. It's green." Calpurnia took us to First Purchase African M.E. Church. It was called First Purchase because it was paid for from the first earnings of freed slaves. Negroes worshipped in it on Sundays, and white men gambled in it on weekdays. As we entered the churchyard, the men stepped back and took off their hats, and the women crossed their arms at their wrists. They made a pathway for us. A woman's voice came from behind us. "What you up to, Miss Cal?" "What you want, Lula?" she asked in a tone I had never heard. "I wants to know why you bringin' white chillun to an end church." "They's my company," said Calpurnia. Again, I thought her voice was strange. She was talking like the rest of them. "Yeah, and I reckon you's company at the Finch's house during the week." "Don't you fret," Calpurnia whispered to me, and then said to Lula, "Stop right there, and—" Lula stopped and said, "You ain't got no business bringin' white chillun here. They got their church, we got ourn. It's our church, ain't it, Miss Cal?" We told Calpurnia that we wanted to go home and that we weren't welcome here. When I looked up, Calpurnia had amusement in her eyes, and others were coming toward us. Lula was gone, and we were surrounded by others. One of them, Zebo, said to not pay attention to Lula, and that they were glad to have us there. Inside, church service was beginning. Reverend Sykes started by making some announcements. I noticed that there were no hymnals, and when I went to ask Calpurnia about it, she told me to be quiet. Reverend Sykes said that they would be taking up collection today, and for the next 3 Sundays for Tom Robinson to help out his wife, Helen, and family. Reverend Sykes said they would be beginning services by singing hymn number 273. This was too much for me. "How we gonna sing if we ain't no hymn books?" Calpurnia smiled. "Hush, baby," she whispered. "You'll see in a minute." Zebo cleared his throat and read in a voice like the rumble of a distant artillery. "There's a land beyond the river." Miraculously on pitch, 100 voices sang out Zebo's words. The last syllable, held to a hum, was followed by Zebo saying, "That we call the sweet forever." Music again swelled around us. The last note lingered, and Zebo met it with the next line. Reverend Sykes went into his sermon, and after that came the collection. After the coffee can went around the church, Reverend Sykes emptied the coins into his hand and announced that it was not enough. He said that we must have $10. He even had one of the church members close the door until we had the $10 collected. We put in our dimes. Slowly and painfully, the $10 were collected. At the end of the service, when we were all leaving, Reverend Sykes said to us, "We're especially glad to have you all here," said Reverend Sykes. "The church has no better friend than your daddy." My curiosity got to me, and I asked, "Why were you all taking up a collection for Tom Robinson's wife?" "Didn't you hear why?" asked Reverend Sykes. "Helen's got 3 little ones, and she can't go out to work." "Why can't she take 'em with her, Reverend?" I asked. Calpurnia put her hand on my shoulder. On the way home, I asked Cal why no one would hire Helen. She told us that it's because of what folks say Tom's done. I didn't know what Tom had done, so I asked. Cal cited, "Old Bob Buell accused him of raping his daughter and having him arrested and put in jail." "Mr. Ewell?" I thought and remembered what Atticus had said, that they were absolute trash, and I had never heard Atticus talk about anyone like that before. Cal said that I'd have to ask Atticus the questions about this. Calpurnia did explain why they sang hymns the way they did. It's called linen, and it's been done like that for as long as she can remember. Jim thought it would be a good idea to take up a collection to get some hymn books. Cal said it'd do no good since she only knows about 4 people who can read. Zebo, who's Calpurnia's oldest son, was taught by her, and Cal was taught by Miss Maudie's aunt, old Miss Buford. Another thing I was curious about and had to ask Cal about was the way she talked around the other folks. "Cal," I asked, "why do you talk to your folks when you know it's not right?" "Well, in the first place, I'm black." "That doesn't mean you have to talk that way when you know better," said Jim. "It's right hard to say," she said. "Suppose you and Scout talked colored folk talk at home. It'd be out of place, wouldn't it? Now what if I talked white folks talk at church and with my neighbors? They'd think I was putting on airs to beat Moses." "But Cal, you know better," I said. "It's not necessary to tell all you know. It's not ladylike in the second place. Folks don't like to have somebody around knowing more than they do. It aggravates 'em. You're not going to change any of them by talking right. They've got to want to learn themselves, and when they don't want to learn, there's nothing you can do but keep your mouth shut or talk their language." As we approached the house, Jim told me to look on the porch. I looked and saw Aunt Alexandra sitting in a rocking chair.